Rick Beato, excellent music YouTuber, has over 1 million subscribers, well deserved. For those who don't know him, he has a video series called What Makes This Song Great. He does his own review and breakdown of each of these songs that he thinks are great. They are typically in the larger rock meta genre. A lot of them are classic rock. And every now and again, one of these classic rock bands or the label that represents them gets the video blocked. When this happens, Rick gets super pissed and he makes a video about it usually. And that's completely justified. You know, he typically has them claimed almost every single time, which sucks. What he's doing is 1000% fair use, without a doubt. But he says, forget it. You know, it's not worth my time. I don't really care. You know, let it go to the band. It's fine. I don't need it. But when it gets blocked is when he gets to the point where he's like, all right, look, trying not to swear in the beginning of the video. Let's just put it that way. So his latest Led Zeppelin video was initially blocked when he uploaded it, and he made another video saying like, man, I put in 15 hours worth of time to do all this. Why is this even worth my time to do this at this point if no one's even going to be able to see it? Rick, I understand your feelings quite completely. So I'm going to take a look at his video explaining that it was blocked. It's unblocked already now, just a heads up, because he drops basically a bunch of hits at these classic rock era type of groups, and also make some observations about what he calls the era of perfect music. And I have some thoughts to give back to you. So let's get going here, Rick. Hey, Future Mike here. Just to make a quick explanation, I know that Rick is talking off the top of his head, and he probably hasn't thought a whole lot about the things that he had to say. He probably didn't organize his thoughts perfectly. Just like me. Believe it or not, I'm walking on. So me picking these things apart is not me saying like, oh, Rick is stupid, or oh, Rick is like the most wrong person ever. I understand that he was just kind of ad-libbing and just venting his frustration. Moving on. First things first, I always love his intros. Beautiful piano, simple After Effects type of transition stuff. I really wish I took the time to learn After Effects.
I just uploaded a video. It was my episode 88 of What Makes This Song Great, and it was blocked immediately. It was, instead of getting on here and complaining about blocking and the fact that I wasted 15 hours of my life working on a video.
Instead of saying exactly what I just said. No, I'm just messing around, sorry.
It made me think about the relevance of musical styles.
I like this.
The era of imperfection, if you will, of those early rock bands from the 50s through
like the Doors, maybe?
An era where the limitations of the recording mediums, for example, tape, made you think before you tried to fix things because you didn't want to take a chance on erasing things.
I love this type of mindset, this analysis of making and producing music. I was told this multiple times by my mentor. Back in the day, you actually had to be talented because with tape, you had to get it right, as opposed to having this essentially infinite amount of tape, if you will, that is digital information going into our computers nowadays. Or back in the day when they did direct to vinyl and they had to capture it through a little phone, like you got one take. There wasn't even going back and cutting and maybe trying to splice some tape together. No, you got one take. Or before multi-track recording, again, you know, you could spend all this time wasting takes, doing it over and over again. But if you messed up in the middle, you had to start all over again. The whole song, everyone in the band. Ringo was not very well liked early on in the Beatles. But also the part that I never even really considered, but that Rick totally has brought to light for me, was that, you know, even if it's imperfect, what if there is something cool in that imperfection? What if there is magic in that mistake? You had to think about whether you were going to do it over and record over it, because you're not getting it back. You can't hit Control Z on tape.
Imperfection in music has become irrelevant to a certain degree. Most of the music, popular music that's on the radio or that people stream on Spotify
or the not popular music,
is music that's generally created by a small group of people on laptops. There's very little imperfection in it. You don't have to worry about things being out of time or having a human element to it because it's actually not even thought about.
Yeah, the human element. I can understand why a lot of the people who are into sludge, who are into the really dirty classic rock, who are into Nirvana, who are into old school thrash, who are into punk, why they hate a lot of modern metal. Modern metal is very focused on being precise and snapped to the grid, or at least as close as you can be. And I mean, I even think of Dream Theater. Dream Theater focuses so much on being so technically badass and on the metronome, on tempo, on the grid, naturally by playing, that it starts to feel inhuman. The part of the magic for me of why I enjoy Dream Theater is because you know it's being played by real people and it feels inhuman. That's like a whoa.
Placed on a grid. The sounds are created in studios and they're presets that some people tweak. Some people don't even bother tweaking. They just take out a preset, start playing, create a loop, put a song together. They follow these formulas. And the era of limitation is over now.
Sorry, didn't mean to cut you off there, Rick. The era of limitation is over now. To a degree. One of the things I'm actually starting to do for myself right now is the hashtag RPM challenge, or record per month. You're supposed to make a full-length record over the entirety of a month. It's supposed to take place during a specific given month, which I didn't have time to do because I've been busy with other things, but I'm doing it for myself and I'm narrowing it down to an EP. You can put as many limitations as you want to place on yourself, is kind of my point. If I give myself a hard cutoff of 1 month, that's it. Now, granted, I have the plethora of technically no limitations of whatever production I can make here in my home, which is quite a bit, actually. But let's even take that out of it. Let's say specifically technology-wise. Say you work for a big name AAA pop artist. Money is no object, and you have every piece of imaginable technology at your disposal. Even still, I think that there are limitations because you limit yourself to not having the human element, if that makes any sense. The more you dive into the technical possibilities of making everything perfect, the more that you dehumanize the piece. Not to mention, these pieces of gear only work as well as the people operating them, and human error is its own limitation. I get what you're saying. I think more accurately it would be like the era of tape is over, the era of actually knowing how to play your instrument is over. And in some ways, it's actually just beginning.
What elements make them great? I don't always think the songs myself are great. That's why I have a question mark in the title. What makes a song great? It's usually a combination of things. The melody, the lyrics, the rhythm.
Definitely
Many times
rhythm.
you see imperfections in the music that make it great. Now, you don't necessarily think about it. When I was going over Ramble
Oh,
On,
I do!
But we accept those things. Because the era that I grew up in was an era of imperfection, and people really never even thought about it, that this was the humanity.
This was the era of imperfection. And he's using this as a way of, in my opinion, justifying people sucking at their jobs. People not putting in the care or responsibility to actually be good at their instruments, as good as they could be. I'm sorry, that's how I feel about it. See, the era before that, it was jazz style music or big band music, more classically influenced music. And if you had a strict composition, not a loose one where it's like, oh, it's the wrong note. Well, this is jazz. We can just make shit up. Blah, 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 blah. It's like, yeah, I mean, you can technically do that, but there's going to be people being like, out. Imperfection is what dropped you from the market and said, oh, okay, you're not playing with our group. The era of imperfection, which he is referring to, don't get me wrong, there's some great music in there, even with all of its faults and everything, but it's not the imperfections itself that made it great. The reason why we take all of this time to use these quote unquote limitless technologies to line things to a grid, to make sure they're in tune, to get the production sounding as robust and full and beautiful as possible, is because they sound more perfect, because generally speaking, people gravitate towards that. I have found more often that people who enjoy the music with a lot of imperfections in it typically don't realize that they are imperfections. Once they have something else to compare it to, once they educate themselves a little bit, at least on Western music theory and that type of standard, then it starts to become more apparent to them. Now, I'm not saying that's necessarily a good thing to be annoyed like I am about all of this quote unquote imperfect music out there. But I've noticed with a lot of people on my channel, after a while, once they actually start practicing their listening skills a lot more, as opposed to their enjoying and moving about skills and like, oh man, this is cool skills. Man, those are the most valuable ones, is the ones where you can tell things that are cool or not. It's the most valuable skills. Those imperfections start to rise to the surface more and more once you involve yourself more with the art form. Bending a note too sharp typically isn't cool, typically isn't good. Are there circumstances where it can be? Yes. I completely agree. Are there more circumstances where it's not as opposed to is? 1000% yes. The era of imperfection, in my opinion, a lot of that boils down to the era of laziness, lack of technology, and trying to manufacture a popular sound. The laziness of the musicians, the lack of technology due to the era that it was in technologically, and the fact that big labels wanted more money, married together, made a lot of imperfections. Future Mike here, or the musicians weren't talented enough, just period. The trade-off of this for the modern era, the era of perfect music as he's calling it, is we can have multiple performances by musicians who suck really bad, but in post, we can make it sound perfect. And depending upon the circumstances of whether or not they can actually perform that live or not, that's a lie. And that's also really awful. To give you a quick perspective on me, if I had to have the era of imperfection, but it's the same thing you got live, versus the era of perfection, but when they play it live, it's complete dog shit as compared to the record, I will take the imperfection side because that's honest. And that honesty in what is perceived to be genuineness, what's the word? Integrity. I think that's part of what is so appealing about the imperfections.
And that humanity has been taken away to a certain degree when you quantize things, when you auto-tune things,
yeah, auto-tune for sure.
When you use all canned sounds, when you think of the 808 drum machine, that it was created back.
I don't really like that thing personally.
Originally, people had to create their own sounds. They had to record drums from scratch with microphones. They had to record acoustic guitars with microphones and vocals and things like that. And they couldn't tune them. They had to sing them till they got them right.
Okay, yeah. So the sing them until they got them right, I appreciate. But this is where I don't understand his point of like almost everyone still does that today. Okay, I shouldn't say almost everyone. Most of the people that I listen to do. He's not wrong about the canned sound thing, by the way. And metal is pretty fucking bad about this. I am not a fan of using sample replacement for your drums. If you're really trying to make an effect of it all, I mean, maybe. But then also there's got to be some honesty there of like, this is fake. That's probably why I'm not a big fan of power metal. Oh, and for something that is so overly produced and fake, it still sounds like shit.
And they wouldn't dare take a chance on erasing something that was close, because at that time, perfection was the enemy of good or great. And people learned to live with imperfection.
Learn to live with imperfection. Okay. I don't know if it was the enemy of good or great necessarily, but it was the enemy of cost efficiency. We only had so much time. We didn't know if it was going to be worth the resources of keeping everyone there in the studio and burning more tape or burning more discs to burn to. And we didn't know that the musicians were going to actually do a better performance than this. So, yeah, I don't know if it was the enemy so much as it was somewhat necessity, and also the laziness of the musicians not knowing how to fuck to play their instruments. But let's keep going.
Producers like Mutt Lange, who did, well, he did the AC/DC Back in Black album, but really he's known for things like Def Leppard and these records that are perfect, whatever that means. And Shania Twain, who he was married to.
I'm with him on that. Records that are perfect. I'm not a fan of that.
Records. And
no
then
such thing.
We eventually made it into the late 90s and we had Pro Tools. And Pro Tools made it to where anyone could make records. Anybody could make a bad drummer sound like they could play in time. Anybody could make
Nirvana.
a bad singer sing in tune, whatever that means.
When he said quote out of tune, motherfucker, you know exactly what that means. I cannot abide this whole like, well, tuning is all relative, blah, blah, blah. I mean, yeah, technically there's multiple systems of tuning. But any of us who actually know better understand that the overtones that are generated create a dissonance when things are out of tune. There's a reason why a perfect fifth sounds less dissonant than a major third. There's a reason why the word dissonance was created in the first place. There's a reason why people who play, not quote out of tune, actually out of tune, aren't listened to as much. And Rick, I'm sorry, I'm not yelling directly at you. I understand it was just kind of a side thought thing that you did. There are a lot of other music people that are so fucking open-minded, apparently, who go off on this whole tangent about how being in tune is all relative and all bullshit. I'm just like, yeah, okay, you guys play a show out of tune. Tell me how well that works! God, I can't abide that shit. You either haven't thought about it enough or you're being disingenuous. I'm sorry. Moving on.
Who do these people think that they're selling their music to? Or who do they think they're introducing? What new audience are they introducing their music to? Well, I say that they're not. That their music is going to be gone with them. And it will never be introduced to new audiences because of these draconian things like blocking.
Okay, so a couple of things. Are things like blocking draconian? Yes, they suck and they're stupid and they need to go away. Well, at least if it's fair use. But besides the point. It's really funny to me, these guys who make a living off of being incredibly imperfect, being such uptight assholes about their music being shared around. These guys that Rick is defending their type of music in this video, how obviously full of shit they could be. Yeah, we're super cool, free love and peace and good happiness, unless you use our music, in which case go get fucked with a rake. But specifically addressing the blocking thing, I don't think that that's going to stop people from discovering their music. Bands like Led Zeppelin, Black Sabbath, Ozzy Osbourne, Jimi Hendrix, and even the Grateful Dead, God bless even the Grateful Dead, they are so baked into music as it exists right now. There are so many different forms of their music floating all over the world right now. Because, I mean, nobody's releasing stuff on tape. Nobody's releasing stuff on record. Or, I mean, there are some people releasing stuff on vinyl. And there's not a whole lot of people buying CDs when you have originals of these from back in the day that's looked at a collector's item. And people are going to ask why, at the very least. Not to mention, you find their stuff all over streaming. And that's really where the heart of finding new audiences are. That and the word of mouth of their legend, if you will. Now, to kind of amend Rick's statement slightly, by doing things like blocking, the younger generation who actually understands this modern technological age is going to look at them with much more skeptical eyes and think, yeah, they make some pretty cool music maybe, and a lot of people love them, but they're real dicks. I'm looking directly into your soulless cavity, Gene Simmons. You know you're probably doing something wrong when everyone has a story about how awful you are in person. So let me expound a little bit further on some of these things. I think there are some real benefits to the age of imperfection because it taught us to break out of the narrow boxes that we were kind of confined into. It taught us to relax and take it easy. You're still young. That's your fault. There's so much you have to go through. It taught us to appreciate the imperfections that really bring out what we perceive to be the humanity of the music. Now, on the flip side, the cool thing about the modern day of striving for that perfection partly is the fact that, one, we have redefined the perfection thing. By having the era of imperfection, we have generations of people raised to think that these imperfections were, one, purposeful, and two, cool. So when you had guys like Hendrix who were bending notes way the hell out of tune, couldn't do it the same way twice, you breed people like a Steve Vai who ingests that which is on a recording, so therefore that recording is the composition and starts composing with that type of imperfection in mind, it turns it into an intentional, reproducible part of the composition. So you take the imperfection and you perfect the method of it. I think that's pretty damn cool, personally. The sensations that wash over us when someone bends the note slightly higher than they should, or like a quarter step bend on a blues note when you're going dun 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 bum 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 dun. I'm not going dun 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 dun. I'm going dun dun ba-dum 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 bam ba-dum. Anytime I play that, I always bend it a quarter step because it sounds so much damn cooler. Sometimes it's a little more, sometimes it's a little less. I don't know. I focus on whatever the tension in my middle finger wants to do at that moment. That's not an FU reference, it's just in general. But things like that are carry-offs from that generation that aren't going to die. But keeping the consistency of the composition, I think, is equally as important. Those moments of experiencing those imperfections on record, when you don't get the same thing reproduced to you live, you're like, I feel cheated. To people who don't know any better, they're just gonna be like, oh, it's a different version of that song. And then when they finally meet their heroes in person, be like, why don't you play the version that you played on the record? And then the people who are playing the song are like, you see what I mean, Rick? Like, it's so obvious to me. I'm sorry, it really is. The era of imperfection is highly overrated, in my personal opinion. Not that it didn't do great things, not that it wasn't important, but in comparison to where we are now, with that as the shoulders of the giants that we were standing on, we're improving what they did. There's also a whole lot of absolutely sinful garbage out there in what he was saying, the pop music community, in the metal community, absolutely. Probably in the prog community as well. But the greater point is, the era of imperfection isn't something to be worshipped. It's something to be appreciated, absolutely. And there is the proper way of saying, you know, what makes this great. And most of the time I'm kind of like, I think it was fucking great. But as long as there's still people like you and me talking about music here, and even me, who is not a huge fan of imperfections, still preaching the importance of them, even in music that I hate, and I'm still just like, man, I never want to listen to this song again, but I have to admit, it's really well done. Really well put together. That spirit of humanity will live on. Even if there weren't people like us, there's still going to be half-assed people picking up instruments, getting into a garage and banging shit, because thankfully we don't live in an actual draconian society. So imperfections will move on and they will keep lasting. Have you heard of the band Swans? Okay, no bullshit. Swans are actually super talented, but I never want to fucking listen to them ever again. So I guess that's my 2 cents on it. I understand why you made the video when you did. I understand what you were trying to say. I don't think it was the most artful way of saying it, but it gave me an opportunity to express my feelings on why The Doors and Nirvana are extraordinarily overrated. Oh, and you can throw the Grateful Dead in there too. So that is it. What do you think of the era of perfection or the era of imperfection? Let me know in the comments below. If you like this video, give it a like, please. That really helps a lot. If you want me to keep making badass content for you, you can support me on Subscribestar. And you can follow me on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at Become the Night. Thank you guys so much for watching. See you in the next video. Rock on!